Hey everybody, it's JAC James Leonard Cox, and welcome back to the When Words Fail Music Speaks podcast with me, of course, Jim Chuck. I just told you that before. But we have an awesome interview for y'all today. His name is Jim Berkenstadt. Um, yes, he's shaking his head right, so I got it again, yes. Because sometimes I have a hard time pronouncing the last names. But first, let me tell you about him before we bring him on. So Jim Berkenstadt, known as a rock and roll detective, is a renowned music historian, author, and consultant specializing in uncovering hidden stories behind iconic musicians and bands, which we all love to listen to. He is the author of the acclaimed book "The Beatles Who Vanished," which we're going to dive deeply into that because I'm serious. I'm curious too, which explores the mysterious disappearance of Jimmy Nicol. Did I pronounce his last name right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Perfect. Who briefly replaced Ringo Starr in the Beatles. Jim has also worked as a consultant on music documentaries and projects involving legendary artists such as the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Nirvana, my favorite band, and George Harrison. With a focus on accuracy and rich historical site, uh, Berkenstadt is the go-to expert for music projects across the world, films, and television.
Mhm.
Jim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for that
Great.
wonderful introduction, James. It's really nice to be on your show.
It's so great to have you on because I'm like, okay, so I must say that everybody loves the Beatles, and
Sure.
there's a big dispute whether you like the Beatles more or the Rolling Stones. I present that question to you. Do you like the
Oh,
Beatles more, or is it the harder Stones band?
my number one band is the Beatles, and
Yes,
always
sir.
will. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That was mine too. Because ever since my aunt told me about them, I just can't get them off my mind sometimes. But I find that this book is really interesting, and we're going to talk about that pretty soon. But
Thanks.
no, but having you on and this being a musical podcast, I feel the need to ask you about your musical background, if you have any, and if you played any guitars or any instruments before.
Well, going all the way back to elementary school and middle school and high school, I played clarinet, which was not very rock and roll, although I was excited when the Beatles used clarinet on Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band
Yes.
for the song When I'm 64. So
Right.
uh, I was cool for a little while there.
There you go.
um, uh, More recently, I've played a little guitar and even more so, I've played a lot of ukulele.
Oh,
I
nice.
probably picked up the ukulele because of George Harrison and his love of that instrument. And it's just one of those things where it's pretty easy to pick up a lot of chords and songs, easier than guitar. And the vibrations make you just feel very relaxed,
Yeah.
it's fun.
Yeah. I've always found music so interesting because they can do more than just make you feel good. Because
Hmm.
I'm sure it can help with memory
Exactly.
therapy.
Yeah.
And I find that so amazing because I was watching a documentary on something where this guy couldn't remember nothing, but when they made him listen to music, something popped back in. It's truly amazing.
It is amazing because so many times someone will bring up a song from their childhood, or they'll hear that song and you'll be with them and they'll say, "Oh, this takes me back to my first date," or the first time I got to play football, or whatever it is. It's interesting that memories get connected in our brain to certain songs, and we then associate that song with that wonderful memory. The other thing too I would say about music is it's really an international language that can be enjoyed by people all over the world. Look at the Beatles; they sang in the English language, but people from France and Germany and Spain and China even they all spoke different languages, but they all enjoyed the Beatles music. So that's pretty special and interesting fact about music as well.
Right, right. Yeah, it's music is considered one world language, right? Because everybody understands. Like, okay, so there's this band called Who. I'm not sure if you know what who they are, but it's HU,
Oh,
and they're a foreign band. I'm not sure exactly where from, somewhere in Asia, where they did a cover of Metallica's "Sad But True." And as I could understand what they're saying, I knew exactly every word. Obviously it's a cover song, but they did it in their language. I knew exactly which part of the song they were at.
right.
So is it fair to call music a one world language?
Yeah, I think it really is. It's just it's magical. Yesterday I heard on the radio a French girl singing Tom Petty's song Mary Jane's Last Dance. And it was just so interesting to hear it from the perspective of a person in France. And it was all being sung in French except for few words here and there. Of course, Mary Jane was in our English language and a few other words. And it was just really nice that a song meant enough to her, when it wasn't even in her language, to cause her to want to translate it and then record it in French.
Right, right. That's amazing to do.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a one world language according to us,
yeah,
which is good.
I
Yeah.
agree. One world language.
So, since you are the world renowned doctor of rock and roll detective, I should. But well, you're a doctor too. Whoever doctor of that, because you're according to everybody, you are the supreme rock and roll detective, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the trademark term I
Yeah,
use. My
yeah,
name is rock and roll detective, and to me, it just means that I'm a historian of music, an author of music. People call on me to consult to them to help them with
mm,
solving mysteries or locating artists who haven't been around in a long time or finding lost footage for documentaries and finding lost photos, sometimes lost instruments. So it's really a fascinating job, and I really enjoy it. And I'm glad that so many people, appreciate what I do and call on me to help them because
right.
every time I help someone, it's very collaborative and I enjoy working on their projects.
Yeah. We are gonna talk about the movies you've been in, but I want to know something about my favorite band, and you did a book on them, Nirvana. Nirvana is always my favorite band ever made. I don't care what anybody says. They
Yeah,
just speak to me in ways that no other band can, and I'm sure you
right.
got that one band too.
I felt that way.
But since you wrote a book entitled, let's see here, entitled
Never,
Nevermind Nirvana, which is on Amazon right now, you can go in and click on the link at the bottom of the description, and there you have it. Um, so you discussed the process of recording Nevermind, right?
yeah.
So let me ask you this: with uh, a sidebar from that album, terrific album, because I think you did another thing with Butch Vig, which
Right.
is that album, right? Okay,
He's an old friend of mine, and
okay,
I think I could almost point to his old studio
all right, yeah,
right behind this building, actually.
yeah,
Anyway, so I was introduced to him by his brother, who I was working with at a company, and he said, you're a big music guy. You ought to meet my brother Butch. He produces albums at a small studio called Smart. And so I went over there and we met, and we instantly bonded because we loved the Beatles, the Who, the Rolling Stones, a lot of those groups we had grown up listening to, and it had turned Butch into a drummer and then a producer.
yeah,
And so I said, "What are you working on right now?" And he said, I'm just finishing up an album by an unknown Chicago group called the Smashing Pumpkins. And then he said, and next I'm told that this group that's touring the U.S. in a van called Nirvana is going to come by and they're going to record their next album with me. And at the time, nobody knew who these people were, and just think
Right.
how big they became. And it's
Yes.
interesting, of course, to me that they both got big starts here in Madison, Wisconsin. So as the friendship grew and I was around when he was working on these different albums, I became fascinated with the Nirvana album because what he did in Madison wasn't the final version of the album. And then Kurt Cobain decided afterwards that he wanted to use those recordings as a way to get a big record deal with a big record company, which ultimately was Geffen Records.
Right.
He wanted
Because
these
they were on Sub Pop.
Sub Pop, right?
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he used those songs for that purpose, and ultimately they did get signed. And then they dropped their drummer just before they hit
Yeah.
heights, which was very similar to the Beatles dropping Pete Best and bringing in Ringo before they hit it big.
Right.
And he signed with them, and then they said, well, we have all these producers. This is REM's producer and this is so and so's producer, Neil Young. And they said, no, 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 we want Butch Vig. And Geffen Records was like, we never, who's Butch Vig? We never.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, he's this cool guy in Madison, you'd like him.
Yeah.
And as I recall, I think they gave up either all or a portion of their advance in exchange for being allowed to use Butch Vig. And that also became Butch's first ever major label
Yeah.
producing job. So then they moved out to LA, and I just thought it would be interesting. I had read a book about the inside of one baseball game, like all the behind the scenes stuff that you don't know, all the signals you don't see, all that sort of thing, and don't know what they mean. And it was a very detailed book about one baseball game. And I said, I want to do that with a record album. And of course, Nirvana exploded and became, the start of the grunge and alternative rock time period in the 90s. And it was a big album. And I thought, well, since I know Butch, that would really be helpful to start with him. And then he put us in touch with other people, members of the band, of course, and the mixing engineer, the mastering engineer. But what we found, besides the interesting behind the scenes telling of how the songs were written, how they were recorded, what went on, we were also fascinated sort of by the sociological impact of that album, how they knocked Michael Jackson off the top of the charts, how heavy metal sort of vanished for a period of time as a result of Nirvana introducing this new form of rock and roll. All these sorts of things that happened outside of the album, but as a result of the album, we wanted to report on that as well. And so
Right.
that became the premise for the book, Nevermind Nirvana.
Yeah. So he took you into the studio, showed you everything you wanted, right?
Yeah, in fact,
Okay.
he got a hold from the record label. He got a hold of the session sheets, and first thing we did was we listened to the original tapes he made at Smart Studio,
Right.
and then I remember he came over with the session sheets for the LA final version of the album, and was showing me how the vocals were positioned and how the different instruments were set up and all. And he talked about positioning microphones to get a really big drum sound, which you can really hear Dave Grohl on that album. And then he said this was an interesting song. I think the title was Territorial Pissings, which is
Yes.
on that album.
Yes.
He talked about how they plugged the guitar, Kurt's guitar, right into the soundboard in the production studio instead of running it through an amp with microphones out in the regular studio. And he said it's just blisteringly loud.
Yep.
So he said, "All right, let's play that now that I've told you something about it, and I'll tell you more after the song." So I turned it on, and then he got up and he walked over and he turned the volume, to 10 on my stereo, and both speakers blew up.
Oh my God.
And he said, "Oh, I feel so bad. I'm so sorry." I said, "No, that's all right." I said,
That's
you
just my
know,
hearing.
if there's anybody who I'd want to blow up my speakers, it would be you, Butch."
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
doing it with a Nirvana song, so no worries. So then we
Right.
took it. I think we then took the tapes over to Smart Studios and listened to the rest of it.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of funny that Butch blew up my speakers.
I'm trying to think of a song that would infuriate me if he turned it up to 10, and I
Mhm.
think it would be Tutorial Pistons because all he does is yell.
Yeah,
So
yell and
that's
that guitar is so recorded so loud and
yeah,
distorted.
and
Um,
it sounds dirty. Yes, yes.
yeah, so it just it shook the house and then it just blew up.
God. Well, that's his house, so I can do it.
That's rock and roll for you.
That's right, baby. Yeah. So okay. So I hear that you are kind of big into theories, right?
You mean, well, mysteries?
Like yes, yes.
Yeah,
Thank you. Theories, mysteries. Yes. Uh,
right.
so let me ask you this about Kurt. Everybody wants to know, and nobody knows. I'm not. I don't want to speak for you because I don't know if you know or not.
Yeah.
Did Kurt commit suicide or no? Because I heard on a documentary they were talking about Courtney Love, and somebody said like she hired them
Hmm.
to end Kurt. Another thing is years later, I think last year I heard somebody else hired somebody else to kill him. So I'm not sure which one's true, which one's fake. Everybody wants to know. So I mean,
Well, so I guess I mean, I haven't looked deeply into it,
okay,
but I have looked at the police reports from that day. I've looked at the situation of what went on at the time. Kurt sort of walked out of a drug rehab place. I think that one of the things, Kurt did not have a, wonderful childhood. His parents broke up pretty early, so divorce can have a pretty big impact on people and on their self-worth. And, he really wasn't cut out for being a student or anything like that in school. He really just loved music. And
yeah,
I do believe that it was difficult for someone like him who came from his background and didn't have really high self-esteem to suddenly have hundreds of thousands of fans cheering for you and idolizing you and just loving everything you do and that you're perfect, treating you like a god almost. And I think that was difficult to handle emotionally.
hmm
I also think that he had some really bad stomach issues that the doctors couldn't seem to fix, and he used to self-medicate with various drugs to try to help with that pain. I think that kind of got worse and worse.
mm,
Uh, I I really don't believe that Courtney Love or any other mystery
yeah,
people were hired to kill him because mainly I don't see a motive there. Whether Courtney Love had stayed married to him, she was in rehab too at the time. They had
yeah,
a beautiful little daughter.
yeah,
I just think that, you know, if they had stayed together, she would have been a millionaire. And so,
yeah,
I don't think there was a money motive. I know that the people at the record label, they were crushed, I mean, because people really who got to know Kurt really loved him and thought he was a cool guy, thought he was like the next John Lennon, very
mm,
talented. And so I'm not buying any of these theories. And one thing
okay,
I learned when I was talking to some people, I wrote a book called Mysteries in the Music, Case Closed. And one of the chapters is, did the CIA try to kill Bob Marley? And when I was talking to Bob's PR guy that was with him during all this time, before he was shot, when he was shot, after he was shot. Uh, he said something very interesting. He said, when we all love a certain person, a public figure, and then they do die, we sometimes need a reason or something to explain to ourselves, why did this happen? I don't understand. Now, Bob Marley didn't die when he was shot in 1976. He lived on for a number of years longer. And when the CIA tries to kill you, you're dead.
Yeah,
And
you're
that's
pretty
that.
much
So
X'd out. Yeah, yep, you're right.
yeah, so I think that and he died later of cancer in his toe, and
Yeah,
later it was found out through a doctor who did a whole study of his family that this sort of cancer ran in his family, and
okay.
the only way to have saved him would have been for him to agree to have his toe cut off.
Yeah,
But he loved dancing on stage. He loved playing soccer. And so he just couldn't bring himself to completely do that. And that may not have even saved him either.
mm,
But people still have different conspiracy theories online about attempts on his life to kill him. And it just goes back again to this idea that whenever famous people die unexpectedly, it's a shock to all of us. And then people have to fill that gap to explain it. There's also a theory about John Lennon being killed by the CIA, who trained and hypnotized the guy from Hawaii to come to New York and shoot John.
yeah,
None of these stories, when I really read all the detail, none of them add up.
right.
They're just people connecting willy-nilly, connecting
Dots.
dots.
Yeah,
And it just, as a former trial attorney, you can't just throw a bunch of dots together and have a jury believe you. You
right.
have to really go from A to B to C to D. And those letters have to be like actual eyewitness testimony or actual documents or actual photographs or video, in order to come to a reasonable conclusion that something happened.
Right.
But in all of these cases, you don't have anything like that. You just have theories and people who want to believe, things that probably just did not happen.
Yeah. So would you say that 95% out of the theories that we hear are not true? Or like only like 5 or 10% may be true?
Hmm.
Or like
It's kind of
how would
hard
you?
because, there are some conspiracy theories that turn out to be true
Right.
uh, in the world. So, I mean, to take all the, uh, for example, it's hard to generalize like that. For
Okay.
example, Brian Jones was a great swimmer. He was a Rolling Stone member, founder, and and he used to swim while he was high or drunk all the time, and he was fine. And then all of a sudden, one night, he drowns in the pool, in
Mm,
his own pool. And at the same time, though, behind the scenes, he was having trouble with a handyman that worked on his property all the time. And as he was fired, since Brian was fired, he was on a certain budget from the Stones. He couldn't just spend whatever he wanted. And that became hard for him to pay the workmen. Later, the workman allegedly was on his deathbed and claimed that he did kill Brian. But it's one of those things where I don't think we're ever going to know the answer one way or the other,
yeah.
whether he drowned or whether he was killed. So it's hard to say what percentage of these theories are real. I think you have to take them one at a time and really delve into them like I tend to do.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people don't research, because I'm an avid researcher, and I'm not quite as well informed as you are, but I do like to research my stuff, even though I hear like 1/10 is kind of off putting news or something that doesn't make sense. I go to
Yeah,
research. So research
right.
is very, very important.
It is. It really
Yeah.
is important.
Yeah.
I think the one of the problems in the media today is that they're not doing enough research. Because everything is so instant with news and it's coming online or on TV, they're rushing to conclusions without really studying or getting information from people who would know one way or another. And I think as a result, we get a lot of news stories that later turn out not to be true
Mhm.
or were covered up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So if everybody goes to rockandrolldetective.com, you
Hmm.
will see a list of his clients. That's what it says at the top. Just click on clients, and you'll see a lot of stuff there. A lot of people that you know. But I would ask you about one picture in particular. Dhani,
Yeah.
Danny Harrison. Okay,
Hmm.
that's George Harrison's son, right?
That's right.
Okay, so can you tell us about that day and how is he a client?
He's a really nice guy. I've met him a few times. He and his mom Olivia have sort of took over um, George Harrison's legacy after he passed away, and so both of them at different times have worked on different projects and just asked me to do some things. I think that Danny and I had met one time at a concert where he was the warm up for Jeff Lynne in Chicago, and we were chatting backstage, and then he and his manager brought up that they were going to work on a new box set of George Harrison living in the material world. And was I aware of any demos, outtakes, alternate takes, etc., that could possibly be included in the set? And so I don't know, I spent about 20 hours researching that, and I came up with a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
And what I don't know is once I send it to them, whether or not they already have it as a duplicate or whether it's something new. I do know sometimes I send them something that's really new that they never knew about. One example is this a demo George did called "Sue Me, Sue You Blues" that I had somehow picked up somewhere as a bootleg or I don't know what, maybe it was just like on a cassette or something. And Olivia was very excited to hear that because she didn't have that demo in their archives. And I think it's because George had worked a lot with a guitarist named Jesse Ed Davis. And Jesse Ed Davis was working on a solo album, and George sent him, recorded this demo of Sue Me, Sue You Blues, which appears on the George's Living in the Material World album. And it really kind of relates back to the aggravation of going through lawsuits with the other Beatles when they were breaking up. That's kind of what the
Mm.
story's about. And he
Okay.
sent it to Jesse Ed Davis, and then Jesse Ed Davis died, and then his girlfriend got it. And I'm not really sure at this point how I got it from her, but
Okay.
anyway,
Uh,
somehow. Anyway, so it was great because it comes back into the family's collection. And that's one of the things that I like to do is not just help preserve the legacy of an artist, but also in some cases try to supplement their archives for future projects. And, I sometimes can find interviews, let's say, that matched up with a particular album. And if that person's no longer with us, it's nice to still have their voice available for when they were interviewed, just like we're
yeah.
doing,
Yeah.
and then be able to maybe use it to do a radio program or something that promotes the next new release.
Nice. Nice. All good stuff. Um, Speaking of the Beatles, let's just talk about your book right now, okay? It's for
Sure.
everybody listening. It's called "The Beatle Who Vanished," and
Hmm.
I have so many questions to ask you. Okay, so one, okay, so I am a big proprietor in the Mandela effect, right? So
The what?
the Mandela effect.
Okay. I'm not
Okay,
sure I'm familiar with that.
okay, so instead of Berenstein, okay, so I remember the Berenstein Bears, right? And
Hmm.
they're saying it's the Berenstain Bears now, which is odd. Okay, yeah, which is
Okay.
odd. Yeah, so but that's the that's the Mandela effect.
Oh,
It's some weird stuff. So you should research that too if you
okay,
can.
I'll
Um,
check it out.
but I don't remember anything about having a Jimmy Nickel as a drummer or any artist of the Beatles.
Right, right,
All I remember is John, Paul, George, and Ringo. You know,
right.
and I looked on let's see here. I looked on Wikipedia, and it said that he was the touring drummer. So I don't know if that's true in 1964. So
Mhm.
yeah. So uh, please let's discuss the book and how did this like come
Yeah.
about? Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is a lot of people in America and Canada who were even first generation big Beatle fans didn't know about this particular story with Jimmy Nicol taking over for Ringo Starr. So you have to go back to 1964. There was no internet. Um, Television, I grew up in Chicago. Television in Chicago, even though it was a big city, they didn't tell us every day what the Beatles were up to or what problems they might have.
All right.
So the only thing I recall was either a teen magazine about them, that would come out every few weeks, which was really garbage because it was like, oh, John's hair is brown and he likes it long. It
Yeah.
was sort of stuff that maybe teenage girls would like, but it wasn't anything important, which is what I was looking for. Like, what are they recording or
Yeah.
where are they going, etc. So I only saw a very brief clip as a kid, and this was at the movie theaters on Saturdays. I'd go to a movie with friends, and they used to have these newsreels from around the world. And it was sort of a 5 minute thing. Instead of cartoons or whatever before the movie, there was this newsreel, and it had the briefest little moment where it said it was something like, and Ringo Starr is in the hospital, and Jimmy Nicol takes over as the Beatles go on tour,
Yeah.
and you see them waving from an airplane.
Yeah.
And that was it. And so for the longest time, I couldn't find anything on it, but I was always intrigued by the fact that Beatle history books only ever had one sentence, and it was in June of '64, the day before the Beatles were to go on their first ever world tour. Ringo went into the hospital with tonsillitis, and Jimmy Nicol took over. And that was all that was known about him.
That's it.
So even when we got the internet, and I was on the internet around 1994,
Mhm.
trolling around looking for information about rock and roll.
Right.
And it wasn't until about 2004, I think it was 2004 or five, that I think the internet really started to get good at being able to search for things through Google and a few other sites. So just one day, I thought, well, I'm going to fall down the rabbit hole and see if I can find anything on this Jimmy Nicol guy. And I really couldn't find much of anything. There was no Wikipedia page. There was, you know, you didn't see any albums by him or anything. And so
Right.
I basically just kept digging and digging until I saw some mention of him in 1960, and it mentioned a band that he was with. And so I started to look up the band and found out they were all still alive. It
Mhm.
was Vince Eager and the Quiet Three. And I found Vince Eager online. He had his own website, so I called him up and started chatting, and he had all this great information about early Jimmy Nicol as a drummer, how talented he was, how he was able to play different styles of music. And then I said, can we go back in time? What do you know about before that? And he had information about a group Jimmy was with. Um, and so I just was able to then contact those people. And so I went back in time as far as I could to the point where he was maybe 17. And then I started to move forward again from Vince Eager. And, Vince, where did he go next? And he said, oh, he went to the Stapleton Big Band, which
Mhm.
was big bands were still popular in the 60s in England. By that time here in America, big bands had faded out. So there I found a guy that was in the band with him, a trumpet player, and then he sort of picked up the story. But what's interesting is, that led all the way up through him recording songs with Pi Records and then being with Georgie Fame and then suddenly getting that amazing phone call to come down to what is now called Abbey Road Studios. It
Yes.
was
Yes.
EMI then.
Very famous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once he was done with the Beatles, it was very easy then at that point, to find out more information because I already knew people in the Beatles organization. I knew people sort of on the perimeter of that as well. And I could start talking to them, and they were starting to. In fact, Neil Aspinall gave me a lot of good information about Jimmy Nicol because he had been on tour with the Beatles, and it was him and Mal Evans that took care of everything on that tour.
Yeah.
So I was really fortunate in that regard. But what's funny is in 1965, Jimmy became June or July, he became bankrupt. His wife divorced him. He had no jobs. He had nothing going for him. A year after being with the Beatles, and
Right.
I found a newspaper that talked about the fifth Beatle is broke and all this,
Yeah.
broke, divorced, and out of work. And there was sort of this sad picture of him sitting in his mom's home on a chair, kind of
Oh,
slumped down,
yeah.
which is in the book.
Okay.
And it talked a little bit about how Paul McCartney secretly tried to help him and got him some work with Peter and Gordon. And then the whole thing just went cold. I talked to all these people again, these British musicians.
Mhm.
None of them knew what happened to Jimmy. They said, we haven't seen him till to this day, 2004. He walked out the door of his house and never came back. So I realized that this guy had vanished.
Yeah.
And then it took me a while to somehow figure out uh, how he had gotten to the next place, which was Sweden. And the way I found which is sometimes the way I find things out is more interesting than the story, but I had found that when Jimmy Nicol came back from the Beatles, he formed his own group called Jimmy Nicol and the Shubdubs, and they went to Denmark. And I saw a little poster then of their band and some other bands, and one of those bands was the Spotniks. And so I contacted them and said, "Do you remember meeting Jimmy Nicol, on this tour when he was with the Shubdubs in Denmark?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, because he joined us a year later." So now, voila,
Yeah.
I've discovered that he went to Sweden to join the Spotniks, and then they can carry the story for the next 2, 3 years.
Yeah.
Until he vanished again, and they didn't know, and no one ever knew where he'd go when he'd vanish.
He just
And
walk out the door and not come back. Wow.
yeah, and he just kept doing it. So
Mm.
it was a lot of fun. It took me many years, but it was worth it.
So did we find him yet?
Well, the
Or
answer to that
wait,
question
wait,
is
is in the book. Is
it's
in the
read,
book.
it's
Yeah.
in the book.
I
Read the
got
book.
I got to read it. Yeah, because I didn't want to. Well,
Yeah,
I should have told you like no spoiler warnings, but that's a good cliffhanger.
that's what I always say to people. Read the book.
Read the
No,
book.
if I tell you, if I
Yeah.
tell all your listeners,
Then they won't buy the book, right?
they won't buy the book.
Oh
They'll go,
no.
okay, now I don't need to buy the book. Well, now
Yeah.
you have to buy the book.
Right. Yes, they have to. So we don't know where he is right now, but read the book.
Right. Read
Yeah.
the book.
All
You'll
right. Yeah.
find out.
So you've been in countless documentaries. Um,
Yes.
so
Uh-huh.
does because you've been in several Beatles ones. You had one with I think Garbage, Shirley Manson, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was in a garbage documentary it was about smart studios.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
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 I recently did what's it called? A heavy metal documentary
Yeah.
that covers the 80s years, etc. I just finished one that's going to be out next year called If These Walls Could Rock.
Mm.
It's about a cool hotel called the Sunset Marquis in Los Angeles. where a lot of famous musicians stay. And it's one of those kind of extended stay places because there's like a kitchen and a living room in your suite. And down below in the basement, there's a recording studio. And what's interesting are stories of different artists from different parts of the world coming together, meeting around the swimming pool and then writing songs together, working together. So it should be a really interesting, fun documentary for people.
Yeah.
That's the
So you are a like an avid researcher, right? So does
Yeah,
the director figure out what he needs to put in that documentary, come to you and say, "Do you have this for
exactly.
me?" Okay.
Yeah, usually they'll, we'll have a meeting, a production meeting, and they'll give me a few things. And then later they'll send me kind of a list. Like, we need video of Van Halen at a picnic in 1987 in Los Angeles. And I remember there's one, we need home video of a heavy metal guy named Sebastian Bach, and he jumps up on stage at a wedding and sings like a Led Zeppelin song. And they're like, this was a really important moment in history because there were entertainment people in the audience at the wedding.
Okay.
And they were impressed with him, and then they signed him to a record deal, put him together with his band, and the rest was history. And so they said, we can't do this documentary
Right.
without this material. I said, okay, well, where did the wedding take place? New Jersey. Okay. What year? We don't know. Where was the reception held? What city? We don't know. What was the name of the reception place? We don't know. Uh, who got married? We don't
We
know.
don't know.
So,
Oh no, they
so,
don't know nothing.
so they knew nothing.
Right.
And they said, but we've got to have this footage. So, I was Googling stuff like Sebastian Bach wedding, home movies, all these different buzzwords, nothing, dead ends. So I thought, well, sometimes you just have to put down a project, just let it sit for a few days, and maybe you'll have some new ideas. So that's what I do when I hit a dead end. So talk about miracles. 4 days later, Alex Orbison, who's Roy Orbison's youngest son, calls me up, and he's a friend of mine. And he says, Jim, I just finished reading Mysteries in the Music, Case Closed, your book, on tour with my band, and I loved it. Every chapter's a different mystery, and you totally solve it. And he said it was so great to have that on tour, because you're on long bus trips sometimes, with the band. I said, oh, I'm so glad you liked it. And he said, hey, I got a buddy who's going on tour with his band, and I think he'd really like it. Could you send me a signed copy for my buddy? And I said, sure, tell me who to make it out to. And he goes, his name is Sebastian Bach.
Oh
And I'm
my
like, wait a
God.
minute.
Hold
This is
on.
the guy I'm looking
Wait,
for.
yeah.
I
Can
said,
I
well,
have
if
his
you
phone
give me,
number? Yeah, right.
I
Give me his
said, you
phone
give
number.
me his email and
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
give him the book. And he
Right.
goes, no problem.
Yeah.
And, I told him what I was searching for. And then I reached out to Sebastian Bach, said, your book's on the way. Uh, but here's this
Hey.
documentary I'm working
Yeah.
on. Can you tell me where I can find this footage? And he goes, oh yeah, that was Mark so-and-so's wedding, and he took his own footage, and here's his email, here's his website, and he still has that footage somewhere.
Yes.
A miracle. Yeah,
Right.
but it was so
Exactly.
much fun, to help the director on what I thought was an impossibility, not knowing any information about it. So
Yeah.
sometimes you just get lucky.
Hey, I love that story because it seems like when people hear nothing about what you want, and the first thing is like, "Come on, man, this job really, really sucks." But when you find the end game, man, it pays off tenfold, doesn't it?
Oh, it's so great. I was just so happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's in that documentary about the heavy metal era.
Okay. Nice, nice, nice. In your research and work as a rock and roll detective, so what has been the most unexpected revelation or discovery about a musician or band?
Hmm, that's a good question. Well, of course, the whole, the Beatle who vanished was a real revelation. As I got closer and closer to finding out what happened to him. That was one, but another one I would say was, I think the one of the chapters in Mysteries in the Music Case Closed is called "Did the Beach Boys Steal a Copyrighted Song from Charles Manson?" Who, as we
I've
recall,
heard
was
about
this
that. I have heard about
psychopath.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that's been out there for a long time. And I read about it online, and I thought, one guy said, "Oh, well, I saw this happen." And then later, when I really dug into it and found, well, who was at the house after Bob was shot? Was this guy there? And he goes, "No, he never was around." I'm like, okay. Yet he's claiming to be an eyewitness just so he can spout off a bunch of fake
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
So, but back to the Manson thing. It was an interesting study because I found out that there was a guy named Greg Jacobson in the room. Dennis Wilson had met Charles Manson because he had picked up a couple of girl hitchhikers who turned out to be part of Manson's group.
Right.
And Manson was, playing guitar at Dennis's house. And Dennis was a drummer. And for history purposes, a little background, Brian Wilson had written all these great hits for the Beach Boys. But by the late 60s, he was starting to have mental health issues. He was doing acid. He just wasn't that well. And so the rest of the Beach Boys had to come up with songs to meet the deadline for their next album. And you can imagine a drummer who doesn't play much of any other instrument, it would be hard for him to pitch in a song. So he was impressed with some of the songs that Manson would play around his house. So he sent Greg Jacobson and Manson to a studio to record some demos. They came back, and one of the demos was of interest to Dennis Wilson. And so there were only three people in the room when they discussed, whether this song would be somehow a Beach Boy song or a Manson song or what, and what the legal deal was, if anything. And that one person who's still alive, Manson's dead, Dennis Wilson's dead. So that meant I had to find Greg Jacobson. Then, as a lawyer, I had to get the facts from him and elsewhere of this transaction, compare it to the copyright law of that time. And in 1969, the copyright law had been made in 1908. So it was very simplistic and not everything was covered. So then you have to go to case law because the statute doesn't really tell you the answer. And you have to extrapolate all this stuff. And then I went to a federal court, district court judge who's an expert on copyright, and another attorney who I knew who's an expert on copyright. And we all got together to discuss the facts, apply it to the law, and ultimately come up with an answer. But the first part was, where do I find this guy, Greg Jacobson, to get the facts? And the big revelation was that I couldn't find him. He did not want to be found because he had testified against Charles Manson in those murder trials.
Oh, yeah.
So, and everyone who testified was fearful that the Manson people who weren't arrested would come after you and kill you.
Yeah.
So he vanished and couldn't find him. But so a lot of people, they'll go on Google and they'll just read the results on page 1. Well, I go to all the way to page 25, which takes forever. But I got to page 25, and here was this brief mention of Greg Jacobson and the drummer for the Foo Fighters. I can't think of his
Oh,
name. Taylor. Is it?
it's 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 Tim Hawkins. Well,
Taylor Hawkins. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So I found this mention, and I didn't know whether this Greg Jacobson was the same one I'm looking for, but it said that he did something with Taylor Hawkins.
Yeah.
So I called my buddy Butch Vig, who we've already mentioned, and of course Butch has produced the Foo Fighters and knows them all very well. I said, "Hey, can you put me in touch with Taylor Hawkins?" I'm trying to find this guy who might know something about this chapter I'm working on. So Taylor Hawkins said, "Oh yeah, this is the guy. This is Greg Jacobson, who was friends with Dennis Wilson and with Manson." And he said he's in hiding, but because this is such an interesting story to me, here's his phone number and his email, and you just tell him that Taylor said it's okay to
Wow.
talk. So I mean that it's you're so fortunate when you can call on different people in the industry and they can help you out, because without it, again, it would have been a big dead end. So I
Right.
called him at his secret hideaway somewhere in the world.
Like just like called me in San Diego. Yep.
It could have been anywhere.
Get it
And
right.
he was very helpful. I mean, he basically remembered it like it was yesterday. And
Great.
who wouldn't remember something as crazy as dealing with Charles?
Yeah, that is yeah, that is a
So
big story not to forget, you know.
right. So that was a big revelation. The information he gave me, both, was fascinating and it was interesting, and it also helped me solve that mystery.
Nice. All good things, yes. And I
Yeah.
bet you and I bet that felt like you that was payoff tenfold too when you found, the guy you're looking for, you know.
When I what?
I, I said I bet you felt like you hit jackpot when you found
Yeah.
Taylor Hawkins, because that's once in a lifetime, really. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Yeah, it's just good fortune. Sometimes you get lucky, but
uh,
you also work hard and use your skill. So it's kind of a combination of everything.
right. Just all right. I do have a few more questions if that's okay with you, because I don't
Yeah,
know how much time we have with you.
yeah,
Um,
sure.
so you mentioned that you are a trial attorney.
Hmm.
Is it are you a music attorney, or you just but like a theft one or something?
So I was a trial attorney in Chicago and in Madison, Wisconsin,
Hmm?
and I handled cases like, and these were jury trials, personal injury cases where people are wanting money for injuries and such or damage to their vehicles, medical malpractice cases where people sue a doctor or a nurse or something saying they weren't, properly treated. Uh, Contracts, so breach of contracts where one party says you cheated me, no, I didn't, you cheated me.
Yeah.
So these are all not related to criminal cases, which involve people's freedom. These
Yeah.
were all money, civil law is what they call it, and it all involves money changing hands in one way or another.
Okay.
uh,
Well,
and
I asked you that to ask you this. Ask how has your background being as a trial attorney, like we discussed, how has it influenced your approach to investigating the rock and roll mysteries,
that's a
especially
great question,
especially
Jim.
when it comes to myths? Because
Yeah,
myths are myths.
right, that's a great question because in any case, there are people who will lie or
Mm,
stretch the truth, or they'll omit certain facts that if you knew them, that would be really helpful. And before a trial takes place, we have what's called discovery. And one of the parts of some of discovery is written questions that you send to the other side and they have to answer under oath. And the other part is the deposition. And that's where you go to like a conference room of a law firm. And
right.
I'm there, the lawyer on the other side's there, the clients are there, and I have the opportunity to ask questions of the client on the other side of the case. And then there's a court reporter who records it all. And the reason why it's important for in using depositions is because in a relaxed atmosphere, a person might say some things that aren't helpful to their case. And then they try to go on when they get to court, they've been, you know, prepared, let's use that nice word. They've been
Right.
prepared a certain way, and now they come out and lie about that thing that where they earlier when they were relaxed, they told me the truth. So then you have this opportunity to what's called impeach their testimony, which is means to show the jury that they were under oath for the deposition and now they've changed their story today. And so that's called impeaching their testimony. It goes to their credibility and truthfulness. So I probably took over 1,000 depositions of people, and you get to be pretty good judge of who's telling you the truth and who's not. When people tell a lie, they often add some additional information because they think it's going to make them sound better, look better, whatever. And then that extra information that they just made up that was supposed to help, they thought help them, you can then look into those things and find out, for example, oh, that never existed.
Mhm.
Or that person who you said you were with said they were not with you, they were in another state, and they have records to show they were in another state. So people, there's just little tell signs when people are lying. And so that, of course, has come in very handy in interviewing people and thinking also when I interview them for these rock and roll things, do they have any interest in lying to me or in telling the truth to me?
Mm.
And so I'm looking at what they're saying, I'm looking at their mannerisms, I'm listening to their voice, etc. Because I want to see whether I believe they're telling me the truth or not. So that's one thing that came from practicing law. Also, you learn how to search for documents. You learn how to search for video or pictures or something. Like someone may sue my client and say, yeah, I can no longer work. I can no longer do anything fun. I can no longer do anything. And then I send out a guy that videotapes this person bowling for 6 hours.
Right.
So, it's so there's there's that, video, pictures, all types of things that can help get to the truth. And those are all things that I use today as the rock and roll detective.
um, that's very unique that those two industries come together so well for you.
Isn't it? Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. So we've talked about have you written extensively about the Beatles, Nirvana, and other acts that we haven't came across yet. So my question to you is, what bands or artists are perhaps less known? Do you believe deserves more recognition for the impact on rock history?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of the big classic rock bands have been written about.
Yeah.
The other factor I look at is regardless of who the bands are, I'm kind of always looking to solve a mystery. That's sort of my niche, nonfiction music mysteries.
Mm.
So obviously the biggest one I did was this Jimmy Nickel thing. It's being turned into a major motion picture. But it doesn't matter to me whether it's a huge band or a small band. It's just, is there an interesting story to tell?
Yeah.
One that maybe has bigger significance than just the music, maybe something about the human condition or something like that.
Hmm. Interesting. So we have two more questions for you. I hope
Okay.
you're okay with that. And
Yeah.
these are gonna be some of the hardest questions I asked for you today, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So so let's do your Mount Rushmore of all of bands. Who is your Mount Rushmore of music?
My top four bands.
Top four bands. We're gonna do
Okay.
like Mount Rushmore kind of deal.
All right. The Beatles,
Of course.
of course.
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin,
Okay.
the Traveling Wilburys, and the Rolling Stones.
I don't think you can go wrong with that one. That's
Thank you.
you got all the big bands there. Although
Yeah.
I really
I
have
mean, there's plenty of others. A lot of people could make some really good
yeah,
lists for.
yeah,
What
yeah.
are your favorite four, James?
Oh geez. Okay, so mine is gonna be the Beatles also. I love the
Okay.
Beatles. Elvis, because of my mom. She loved Elvis to death.
Yeah.
And of course, I got to throw in my band Nirvana because always will be in forever Nirvana.
Yeah. Oh,
And then,
yeah.
and then the last one could be like you said, so many other bands. But I'm probably gonna add Black Sabbath to that.
Oh,
Black
interesting.
Sabbath,
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
because they're the pinnacle of metal. I don't think
Right.
if it was for them, we wouldn't have heavy metal today.
Yeah. I think they're like the pioneers of metal.
There's a lot of arguments saying is it Black Sabbath or is it Deep Purple with that one fit Smoke on the Water.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I strongly agree with Black Sabbath because they have that darker tone. You
I
know,
agree with you.
Smoke
I
on the
agree.
Water didn't have any dark tone at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with
Yeah.
you.
Yes.
That's cool.
Thank
That's
you, sir.
cool.
Thank you, sir.
You know, you should have all your listeners send in to you their favorite
That's
four.
a that's a great idea. I'm going to do that on Instagram tonight. So thank you for
Oh,
that
okay.
idea. Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Great.
so we got our hardest question. That's
Oh,
much harder than the one before. Yeah, I'm sorry we had to do this, but yeah, but okay. So this is a question I ask all my guests on the show. So
okay.
can you name one band, artist, or album that you can hear, but you can't tell me or anybody else how it makes you feel deep inside your soul?
So, artist, an album
Or a
that,
song. Or a
or a
song.
song that I really like a lot.
That you hold near and dear to your heart and you can't explain how it makes you feel inside.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. I get told that this is the hardest question goes. I'm kind of putting you on the spot. So
Well, I'm gonna go with, I at first I was thinking Nirvana, but
yeah.
now I'm gonna, that's probably yours, so I don't want to take yours.
No, 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 no,
I think
no.
since I picked the Beatles as my number one band, I'm gonna go with Abbey Road, the
Okay.
Abbey Road album. I when I first heard that album, I think I played it like 12 times in a row, back to back. And my parents were like, "What's wrong with that boy?"
He's listening to him to what, to dad?
Yeah, and so I think the thing that really blew me away was like the first, of course, we're talking about an LP back when that came out.
Yeah.
The first half was, just sort of actual songs, and then the second half turns into this big, connected story of songs, and it ends with this great guitar jam of John, Paul, and George on the song "The End." And I thought, what an apt uh, title of a song, because it's really the last album they recorded,
Right.
and and they called it "The End." And then they just did this amazing guitar jam. That's one of those albums where if I were on a deserted island with a record player,
That's
that's the
it.
one. That's the one I would want,
That's it.
and I'd just keep playing it till I wore the grooves out.
Yeah. So you can say that is a hit after hit after hit song for you. There's no skippable tracks.
Right.
Okay. So
Yeah.
so other than that album, which album do you consider to have play on like until it's done? Like there's no skippable tracks at all other than Abbey Road.
Well, I think Nevermind by Nirvana,
There's it. Yep.
another one.
Yeah.
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 Um, and if I were to come up with another one sort of off the top of my head, the first thing that popped into my mind was Asia by Steely Dan.
Yes.
That's
Great.
another
That's a,
perfect type album.
yeah, that's a great album. All right. So. All right, everybody. If you're listening, we honestly thank you for listening to our show today. And okay, so I will give you a shout out, sir. So he is at rockandrolldetective.com,
Mhm.
and it is Joe Berkenstadt.
Right.
He's got a silent letter in there, I think, which is
Yeah,
fine.
the D, right.
Yeah, which is fine.
Also, people
But
can find my books at Amazon.
yes, yes, you go to rockandrolldetective.com or Amazon, and when you
Yep.
go there, go to his last category books, and you see all of his books. Now, the
Yep.
book that we talked about in this episode is The Beatle Who Vanished,
Hmm.
and uh, you left us on a great like like cliffhanger when you said, I
Yep.
don't know if I found them. So you gotta buy the book, y'all. Come on now.
Right. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Also, if you want a signed copy of The Beatle Who Vanished, you can go to my author site for that book, which is called thebeatlewhovanished.com.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I see you're on all social medias except for TikTok.
I think I'm on TikTok too now.
Oh no, okay, okay, good. Yeah, oh, okay, yeah, because he's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, and LinkedIn, which we all
And yeah.
and TikTok. Yeah.
And LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, yeah. Do you understand TikTok? Because I'm 44 and I still don't understand it quite
You
yet.
know,
If you
I
were
understand it, but I don't really want to make, little videos
right,
and
yeah,
put
because
them out there.
that's what Instagram's for, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think each time I write a book, I create little sort of a book trailer.
yeah.
Just like a
Okay,
movie trailer, but it'd be a book trailer, and then people can look at that and decide if they're interested in the book. So I don't
nice.
want to look at myself.
Right? Yeah, I don't either. You know who does? Who does like looking at
Yeah.
yourself? Yeah. So yes, you could get a signed copy of The Beatle Who Vanished, and of course you could always order on Amazon, like we said. So.
Right.
Mr. Jim, I do honestly love you, and I thank you for coming on. And I hope to God you come back anytime you want to, sir. This has been great.
Thank you so much, James. It's been a real honor for me to be on your show, and I really enjoyed your questions. They were really, really excellent. They made me think hard, and I
Yes.
appreciate
Yeah.
it. It was a great chat, and I'd love to come back sometime.
Thank you so much, sir. And in the meantime, everybody listening, always remember when words fail, music speaks. Bye, guys.